Several years ago, when both of our daughters, Lisa and Lonnie, became eligible to go to camp, when we were living in New Jersey, we went to Camp Manitani. Camp Manitani has the summer divided up by age, and I think that the elementary age, which was 7 to 9 years old, was somewhere later in July, near the end of, I think it might have even been the last week of camp, I don't remember. Lynn Evans was the director then, and it was my first time. I went, our son Trey was not old enough to go to camp just yet, so Pat stayed home with him, and I took the girls there, and they were out in a girls' cabin, and I had a boys' cabin of my own. I was a counselor, and hadn't been there for several years actually, and but it was kind of fun getting started back and getting to know everybody and meeting brothers and sisters from all different kinds of congregations all over the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New York State area that came there. One night we got to talking about politics, and I got to talking about how when I was in high school, that's actually where my political viewpoints actually were solidified. And I used to argue with my teachers. In fact, I'd argue with them at the drop of a hat, and I'm pretty sure that they warned one another about me. There were some classes, of course, where politics never came up, but some classes where it just seemed like, it was just a never-ending discussion. And back in the late 60s, a lot of my teachers, they were, I don't know that they were all necessarily liberal, but they were not of the same mindset that I was of. My dad, I was not a Republican or Democrat. I was an independent. And then, of course, my guidance counselor called me in beginning of my senior year and said, Bob, you're not going to fit in the big universities because of your politics, but I found a small private religious college where you would fit in and be a little bit more, there'll be a little bit more politically comparable kind of place for you. And it was Pepperdine University. Of course, I had never heard of Churches of Christ, and that's where I, of course, learned about them. And anyway, that started me on the trajectory of where I am today. But looking back, well, I was telling these folks this at Camp Manitani that first year I took the girls back, and one of them looked at me and said, "What most of us could care less about politics when we were in high school. What made you so politically savvy and determined to do it?" And I thought for a minute, and then of course, smiled and said, "It was my dad." And looking back, when I was growing up, it was kind of hard to figure out how to please Dad. And if anybody from my family is watching, I'm not trying to put Dad down. He, growing up, I actually thought he didn't like me, that everything I did was wrong. And I found it, it was difficult to please him. He gave me my first gun when I was 6, but we never bonded in shooting from that point on. I don't know why. And then when we got to California, and I'm in junior high, and Dad's trying to move me up, I'm a little nervous and scared, and I'm really not interested in guns and hunting and so forth at that particular moment in time. And Dad got kind of mad, and it was just hard to figure out what pleased him, because everything that seemed I did got criticized. And then there was politics. I don't know what it was, but we just synced right up on politics. I read books, the books that he read. I went to these meetings. It wasn't about political parties. It was about independent thinking. And I guess for some of you today, kind of locating this, we might be more kind of libertarian in our thinking back then. But but I think it was the one thing that I found that pleased him. And from that moment on, we were in sync. When I went off to college, let my hair grow long. That didn't please him. So it was hard to please Dad, but this one thing really pleased Dad. And the Hebrew writer says in chapter 11, verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Impossible to please God without faith. That's kind of interesting, because we try to please all kinds of people. We try to please our employers. We try to please, a girlfriend, a boyfriend that we're courting, and eventually want to marry. We try to please a friend, somebody that we want to get close to and become friends with. There was a brother here in the congregation that he and I actually made a covenant of friendship several years ago, and it was a great thing. When I was in high school, though, I had to figure out who did I want to be close to, and back then, of course, it was for selfish reasons. I was looking to figure out who would make me look good, and so I would figure out who that was and what could I do to please this person so I could be on their side. So whether you're looking to please somebody for selfish reasons or just because you want to be close to them or whatever, you still, the goal is to come to them, to draw near to them, and you've got to figure out what pleases them so that they will invite you in and have a relationship with you. But the writer tells us that, first off, that it's impossible to please God without faith. Over the years, I've heard so many people tell me, well, I'm a good person. I worked with a plumber in New Jersey when we first arrived there. Well, while we were looking for a church to serve, Pat and I got jobs, and I worked with a plumber for a little while. He loved to do bathroom remodeling, but he did we did some new house plumbing too. I learned a lot. Forgotten a lot too since then. But he used to tell me, when he found out I was, trying to get a congregation to be a preacher, and I would talk to him about God on occasion. But I don't go to church or any of that. I'm just a good person. Of course, I found out he really wasn't as good as he thought he was. And so, that's part of the problem with thinking, well, I'm a good person, so I'm going to go to heaven. Well, that's your definition of goodness. It's not God's. Some people say, well, I don't hurt other people. And that might be true. And some say, well, I help other people. I don't just do the negative. I don't hurt them. I actually help them. And that might be true too. Some people tell me, well, I try to do what is right. Well, how do you know what is right? What standard, what guidebook do you use to determine what's right? I've heard some people say, well, I try to treat others the way I want to be treated, which some of them don't really realize that that's what Jesus said. Some people, there was one lady that I worked with in a Jack in the Box back in Lompoc, California. She didn't like my display of religiosity. And so she actually, she read her Bible, she said, and she quoted me in Philippians 4, where Paul says to work out our own, Philippians 2, work out our own salvation in fear and trembling. She said, see, I'm working out my own salvation. So she thought she didn't have to go to church. She didn't have to do any of these other things. She could work out her own salvation. Now, I don't know what all she did, and she might be a good person. But then again, whose definition of good are we going by? And, there are some people who've actually told me, I can worship anywhere without the church. I don't have to go to church in order to worship God. And a lot of those people don't go anywhere to worship God. They just say that they can worship God. They don't actually follow up on it. So there's all of these people that think, that, they've got the insight here, and they don't. Because the writer says without faith, it's impossible to please God. That's just a bottom line. And the writer goes on to explain for those that come to God must believe that he is. Those who come to God. Interesting phrasing there. In the King James it says those who cometh to God. But it's the same word that is used elsewhere for draw near. And I'm wondering if the writer here is picking up on some of these, this phrasing that he uses in various passages that talk about drawing near to worship and so forth, and actually kind of taking us back to the tabernacle. Israel's wandering in the wilderness. I used to wonder at first why God made this movable tent. Well, it was because they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They couldn't have a permanent temple location. But God makes this tabernacle. It's a tent. It's got two rooms in it, the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies is where the high priest once a year meets God, actually comes into his very presence in order to offer sacrifice for Israel. And the writer talks about that in chapter 9, where he compares what Israel did, or the high priest did, to what Jesus actually did to get us to the real tabernacle. But nonetheless, in the tabernacle, there's this tent. But then there's a perimeter around it. I think the perimeter is called the tent of meeting. And the worshiper comes, to the tent of meeting and brings a sacrifice. In the book of Leviticus describes the sacrifice that he might bring. And when he brings an animal sacrifice, he comes inside to the altar, and he actually slays after putting his hands on the head of the sacrifice. So here's somebody coming to worship God. Here's somebody drawing near to the very presence of God. And I wonder how they felt in getting that close to the actual tent where it was representative of God's presence, and what they thought about that. Did they actually believe that God was inside that tent, in that tent only, or did they believe that God was omnipresent? Later on, when Solomon creates the temple in chapter 8 of 1 Kings, he has this great dedication. And he starts off by saying that there is no place on earth, either this temple or the city or any place that can hold God, nor the heavens above. So Solomon understands that God is omnipresent and that no place can hold him. But still, I think the idea of drawing near to worship, that's what the writer is talking about. Those who want to come near to God, come and establish a relationship with God. Like I said earlier, it was hard to figure out what pleased my dad. When I went off to Pepperdine and came home, I grew my hair long. Boy, that did not please Dad. Of course, I knew that wouldn't. But politics, or our views on politics, seem to sync up, and I seem to have, and he and I could sit down and talk about the politics of the day and just feel close to each other, or at least I felt close to him. And so I think that, we all seek a relationship with somebody. We want to come near to them and develop that relationship. And God says that if you come near to me, then here's first of all what you have to do. You have to believe that I exist. My translation, you must believe that God is. It's the word for exist. Well, as I think about that, we live in a very divided world. There are some atheists who don't believe God exists. They believe that there is no God whatsoever. And I'm surprised that there are some people who try to tell me that, science has proved that God doesn't exist. Well, that's an impossibility. First of all, if God does exist, how is science going to prove the existence of a God who lives in another dimension that's not created? And second of all, if God does exist, how is he going to let you prove that he doesn't exist? And if he does exist, and you say that, well, science proves he doesn't exist. Well, that shows that, as he wrote in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that those who want to believe a lie, God will give them a deluding influence. But anyway, there's atheists who don't want to believe that God exists. There's agnostics who aren't sure that God exists and aren't sure that we can know him, even if he does exist. That's kind of interesting because if God does exist, why wouldn't God want us to know him? Because obviously that's where we came from. There are other religions, even today, that have many gods. So they don't believe that the God exists. They believe all these other gods, and they're much like their pagan ancestors of years ago that have created all these gods that try to explain everything. But and there are some religions today that don't have a God. They just some kind of a force out there, a spiritual force. And there are some religions that have God's name, but you can tell by their content and what they actually believe about God that we're not talking about the God of the Bible. And so I think the reason why faith pleases God is because we actually believe that he exists and that makes us distinctive in the world. I'm not trying to say that we always behave properly and that we always do the right thing, but I think that because we believe in the God that we find in what we call the Bible exists, that makes us distinctive in the world. We have a distinctive faith and a distinctive content that feeds that faith. But if we do believe that he exists, then that means that we believe in creation. We believe that all of this came about by the Word of God, the power of God. I know that there's a lot of questions today and a lot of different ways of looking at Genesis chapter 1. My personal approach is that Genesis 1 says that God created the raw material and then he organized it. That the word Elohim, the mighty one, is used in order to demonstrate God's power at work. And so I think that if we believe he exists, we believe that he created everything. We also believe that he gave us his word. I think that if we believe he exists, that must mean he wants a relationship with us, and that word is going to come to us. And what's interesting is that and I've been thinking about this, is that, the word didn't fall down out of heaven and God said, here, read this one day. The word developed over time, and the word, to some degree, kind of displays, if you will, the imperfections of this world. I mean, we have all kinds of manuscripts, but we have variations between them, not in terms of major doctrines. Most of the variations, especially in the Greek manuscripts, are spelling, word order, and little bitty things here and there. There is almost no variation in what it teaches, between the manuscripts. So the word, to some degree, kind of reflects our world in a way. We believe that if God exists, that the fall is true, that we were the ones who rebelled against him. Those who try to say, well, why is there pain and suffering in the world when God's all-loving and all-powerful? Well, because God created this world and kind of gave us choices. Choices have consequences, but we're the ones who decided that this is the way the world's going to be. We put Satan on the throne, the deceiver on the throne, rather than God. But if we believe that he created us, that he gave us his word, and that we are the ones who rebelled, then we also believe in the promises. Now, I'm not talking about there's a lot of little books that talk about the personal promises that God makes to us that we find in Psalms and so forth. I'm talking about the big promises he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then to David, where God is actually working to build the nation and bring Jesus into. And so that's the promises there that I'm talking about. And that's really what the Hebrew writer is talking about, that God made these promises and fulfilled them in Jesus. And so if you believe the promises, then you'll believe Jesus. And so if God exists, then we have every reason, because we believe in him, that we should be obedient. The writer tells us in chapter 3 that those who fell in the wilderness did not enter his rest because they were disobedient. And so they had good news delivered to them, but it didn't meet up with faith. And so we must believe that God exists. But we must also believe that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. I think here he's talking about the character of God. What's interesting, this word, a rewarder, it, as far as I can tell, it means a payer of wages. I thought reward is, something different, but actually he's talking about the paying of wages. What that means, of course, is that there's a relationship. When the first job that I really think of as a job was the McDonald's there in Lompoc, California. I don't remember who the owner was, but Rudy Diaz was our manager, the best manager I think I ever had in any job. Rudy not only knew the job, he not only knew how to run, the business, but he had people skills that just made him a great man. And but when Rudy hired me, there was kind of this, I'm the employer, you're the employee. And there's this relationship that says, okay, I have responsibilities to pay you. You have responsibilities to work. But of course, as an employee, I have to believe that my employer is one who does pay wages, that he has a good character, and he's going to deliver those wages. And so we need to see then that what the writer is really talking about is that we believe that God has a certain character, that we can trust him. And that's why we come to him in faith. Now, we don't call it employee-employer relationship. It's a covenant relationship. But and I'm not trying to relate the two together. I know what Paul says earlier, and that would take a boatload of discussions in order to see this. But what he's saying is that when you come to me, I benefit you. Noah believed that there was a benefit on the other side of the flood. Moses believed that even though he chose the ill treatment with the people of God, that there were wages to be paid, the promised land down the road. And so God, we have to believe that God is a rewarder. Now, Job is interesting because the deceiver goes to God and says, hey, the only reason Job likes you is because you give him stuff. And you take away the stuff, and he's going to curse you. And God took away the stuff, and he didn't curse God. Now, he lamented, and he challenged God, but he never doubted that God existed. He never doubted that God, I think, wanted to pay wages, wanted to give him stuff. But just because he lost it didn't mean that he lost his faith in God. And so God rewards those who seek him, that is, those who want to come and have a relationship with him. Years ago, I actually met a man who said that he was married to a lady. She was Chinese. And what happened was she, in growing up, just had this utter feeling that there was a supreme being who made everything. She didn't know anything about him, and but she prayed and asked, help me, help me find you. And along comes this guy. I think work took him there to China. They met. They started going out. He started teaching her the stuff in the Bible, and she said, "That's the God that that's him." And they got married, and now they're she's a Christian and he's a Christian. She sought him. If you want to read a brief article about Orson Bean in my bulletin article for this weekend's bulletin, Orson Bean is kind of interesting. He didn't believe in God, but he became an addict, got in a 12-step program, told him to pray to a higher power. And he asked this guy, says, well, I don't believe in God. He said, that's okay. Just get on your knees and thank God. And every morning when you get up, and every night when you go to bed. He said, but I don't believe in God. He said, just do it. And Orson said in his autobiography that he did that. He just got on his knees every morning and thanked God. And, he said, thank whoever's out there. And then every night. And after a while, he got more and more comfortable with that. And after a while, he began to realize that there really was a God who cared about him. Now, I'm pretty sure, though, that the writer here, of course, is writing to people who don't, who know God, who have a full-bodied faith, and he's trying to strengthen their faith. But he wants them to know that, to remind them that God has an inheritance for them, and that in seeking them, they are the inheritors or the heirs of that inheritance. God made a promise to Abraham, I'm going to give your descendants this land. He gave it to to Isaac, and then to Jacob. And then when they came in the land, it's fulfilled, but then there's more. And then he promised David, that I'm going to put a descendant of yours on the throne, and he's going to build a temple. Well, Solomon seemed to fulfill that, but no, there's more. And so the writer wants us to see this great full-bodied faith. And I think what he's trying to do is the same thing I'm trying to do today, and that is to help strengthen your faith. Now, most of you who are watching probably already have a faith. You're already drawing near, already seeking God, and have been doing so for quite some time. If that's not you, I hope that you will seek the God that I'm talking about, read Scripture. If you want to know more about him, you can always leave a comment, and I'll be happy to try to answer you. But for those of us who have a faith, this is intended to strengthen our resolve to serve God, our determination, and it's intended to strengthen our assurance of things hoped for and our confidence in things unseen. And so today I pray for your strength, and I pray that what I've said today helps strengthen your faith, and that you see that without your faith, it's impossible to please God. So strengthen that faith, because you believe he exists, and you believe that he pays wages to those who seek him. That is, we benefit by our relationship with God. The covenant that he makes with us says that he will give us, he will take care of us, and the covenant asks that we serve him and do his will. So I hope that today you are strengthened. God bless.